Anti-Semitism turns into an anti-hate bill in the House, and the head of the Young Turks claims evangelical Christians are the real anti-Semites, because conspiracy theory or something. Life sure was grand this week. I'm Andrew Coppins, and you're here for the show where facts, figures, numbers, and language empower you to speak truth to false narratives and hypocrisy. Up first on the docket is the raging anti-Semite that Minneapolis residents elected to Congress just this past year, Ilhan Omar. You see, it seems as if Omar continued to not understand what anti-Semitic tropes are, despite Jewish friends supposedly educating her on the matter. Her words, not mine. Things got so bad that Jewish Democrats were beginning to bring up a resolution condemning Omar's words and actions, but that stopped quickly in its tracks earlier this week. On Thursday afternoon, the idea that those Jewish Democrats had morphed into the House of Representatives managing to vote on a resolution that condemned hate and bigotry of all kinds, not once mentioning Ilhan Omar by name, and putting the very reason for this whole thing about 7th on the list of offenses mentioned in said resolution. But we were all supposed to take this so very seriously. Furthermore, the Democrats have decided to keep Omar's responsibilities on committees and within the caucus going, unlike what Republicans did after giving Steve King his own multiple chances to stop with the white nationalist talk. I only bring that up to juxtaposition how one should handle awful speech by those within the halls of Congress. Now, of course, Omar and King have every right to spew their hatred under the Constitution, but that doesn't absolve them from any consequences at all, especially in the court of public opinion. In King's case, he was stripped of his committee memberships and basically blacklisted by his party. So it should come as little surprise that 23 Republicans saw right through this crap sandwich of a resolution and voted no. They decided that not applying the same standard that they did to their own member of Congress just simply wasn't cool. You had a Jewish member of the Republican side who would have been included in this resolution stand up and say no thank you. That's all you should need to know about the idiocy that ended up being the resolution that passed. But back to the raging anti-Semite known as Ilhan Omar. In her case, no one in leadership has stood up strong against a clear anti-Semite in their midst, despite not one, not two, but 3 separate occasions in the 6 weeks she's been in office? Hell, most of the leadership have actually decided to provide cover for her, which is much worse than the silence that came earlier this week. Check out this doozy from Nancy Pelosi nonetheless.
The incident that happened with, I don't think our colleague is anti-Semitic. I think she has a different experience in the use of words, doesn't understand that some of them are fraught with meaning that she didn't realize, but nonetheless, that we had to address.
Yes, we just saw the Speaker of the House give cover for a clear anti-Semite. In doing so, while trying to lay it at the feet of her immigrant status, is equally insulting. Look, either this is Nancy Pelosi burying her head in the sand, or the Speaker of the House really wants us to believe that an immigrant who grew up in the United States mostly and was educated at a college in the United States is so stupid she can't understand what the meaning of words in the English language are. If the latter is true, then you have to question the voters of the district in which she is elected from, because you're the one that put her into office in the first place. If the former is true, how is Pelosi Speaker of the House? Then I remembered what large parts of the Democratic base of 2019 believe, and what this really is all about for politicians on Capitol Hill. On Friday's By the Numbers segment, I postulated that the reason why Democrats went the way they did with this resolution was all about polls and the 2020 election cycle. As I told you in that segment on Mojo 50 Radio, a recent Pew Research poll stated that 79% of Republicans say they sympathize more with Israel than the Palestinians, compared to just 27% of Democrats. That 27% number matters a whole lot in trying to figure out the reason why Omar wasn't the one being condemned by name and some vague anti-hate resolution came about instead. Things are messy internally for the Democrats, who have a large and much more radical group of freshmen making waves and looking to gobble up power, but also a leadership that is looking for gains in the House and to take over the Senate and White House in 2020. That's a really politically delicate balance to strike, but also a really cynical way to handle what is a moral question. I mean, why would you need a political calculation when it comes to an obviously anti-Semitic representative in your midst? Honestly, as we continue to consider how this past week played out, we also need to consider this fact. That 27% number mentioned before is actually an 11-point drop in support for Israel amongst Democrats since 2001. What appears to be at work is that the Democrats have also noticed the change in their party makeup and realized it's one that doesn't care about anti-Semitism as much as they do about disavowing Israel. To many on the left, the state of Israel is the most evil empire in existence today. Those statements may be jarring to some of you, but the truth lies in whom the Democrats see as the people they need to activate when it comes time for elections next year. When you look at the base of the party in 2019, you start to see that this isn't the Big Tent party of 2000. Instead, you begin to realize the Democrats of today have moved radically left. Look at which politicians are garnering the most support, and look at the rhetoric and policies every one of the big Democratic candidates for president are supporting. Name me one classic liberal candidate amongst the group that has announced they are running already. It hasn't happened yet. And I guarantee you, even when Joe Biden gets into the race, he'll be running away from positions he held just a few years ago in an attempt to seem leftist enough for the 2020 primary crowd. Not condemning Omar's anti-Semitism is a direct correlation to what the base believes. Otherwise, what other possibility exists for not doing the morally right thing? Maybe one could believe that this was a first pitch in a long game for the leadership of the party, one in which the Democratic leadership in power now lets the radicals in their midst step on every rake along the way, and thusly having all of the ammunition to primary them right out of office next year. But that goes right out of the window when Pelosi said what she said on Friday. So, it is much more likely that the Democrats see a base that is much less interested in calling out anti-Semitism and much more worried about actively trying to end the state of Israel, much of which is rooted in anti-Semitism itself. So when you dig into the base of the Democratic Party, read the people who will always vote come primary season, what you find out is that there is a large number on the left who subscribe to the BDS movement, which, if you haven't heard of it already, stands for Boycott, Divest, and Sanction. And they're not talking about doing that to Saudi Arabia or Venezuela here. They're talking about boycotting, divesting, and sanctioning Israel. I won't spend a ton of time going through all of what the BDS movement has said, because I highly encourage you to do your own research. But I will say this, you'll find a large home for anti-Semites in this group. Here's a small example.
We support the Intifada!
We support the Intifada!
We support the Intifada!
We support the Intifada!
Long live Palestine!
Long live Palestine!
Long live Palestine!
Long live Palestine!
From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free!
From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free!
From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free!
Yes, that's the BDS movement at Cal Berkeley chanting from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. And yes, that very saying is an anti-Semitic trope used by Hamas and other terrorist organizations since the 60s. So Andy, that BDS movement could be a small sector of the Democrats? Well, there's a problem, because there are now vocal supporters of it roaming the halls of Congress. Omar and Michigan Representative Rashida Tlaib have long been vocal supporters of the movement, and they're just the tip of the iceberg. As we continue down the anti-Semitic road, everyone's favorite socialist, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, has recently established a relationship with known, long-standing, and unapologetic anti-Semite Jeremy Corbyn over in the UK's Labour Party. And don't get me started on many in the Congressional Black Caucus, who spent most of this last week trying to shield Omar from tough questions, and their own relationship to known anti-Semite Louis Farrakhan. How that man is around any sort of power in 2019 is beyond me. So, when your new stars of the party are on the side of anti-Semitism in association, practice, and in words, how do you walk the tightrope of calling out those moral failings and not piss off the very people you need to vote for your candidates in 2020? Enter the mainstream and leftist media. First, you had Michael Barbaro, who's the host of the Daily for the New York Times, tweeting this out. So far, 14 House Republicans have voted against a bill condemning anti-Semitism, anti-Muslim, and other hatred. Wow. This is going to be hard to explain. Really? Hard to explain? As I did before, Let me break it down really easy like for you. They refuse to vote for a sham bill that never uses the words, "We condemn Ilhan Omar for her anti-Semitism." Either that, or you could have voted no and stood on principle that Omar's disgusting anti-Semitism deserved its own special place in the spotlight. But Barbara wasn't the only one carrying water for the Democrats after a few days of trying to figure out the right angle to take here. Let the gaslighting of this situation continue, courtesy of Jake Sherman at Politico and Politico in general. Sherman's tweet was this: 23 Republicans vote against anti-hate resolution, taking the heat off D's after a very tough week. GOP handed Dems a political gift. Much to ponder. Liz Cheney votes against GOP leader, a big split in leadership team, which many House onlookers were anticipating at some point. Sherman's employer decides this headline is the takeaway from all of this past week in Congress as well. Political playbook. Republican leadership splits, and the party splinters over hate resolution. Holy gaslighting, Batman, and holy running cover for the anti-Semite that started this all, Ilhan Omar. I bring both of these examples up to remind you of exactly why the Democrats could get away with not condemning Omar by name. They have an entire mainstream media to do their bidding. They knew this would be something they'd spin around on the Republicans as a loss, no matter what the final vote on that bill would have been. Now, on to the actual leftist media, and again, we see why this resolution turned on its head. After all, one of the leading voices in leftist media is literally named after a genocidal group from the early 20th century. You know it as the Young Turks. I'll give you a hint. They aren't ones to take kindly to Israel or people of the Jewish faith either. Which brings me to the second topic today, Cenk Uygur and his crazy conspiracy theory that evangelical Christians are the real anti-Semites. For those of you who don't know, Uygur is the founder and biggest mouthpiece on the Young Turks. This is a thing that is actually still up on Twitter as of the time of recording. You know what's real anti-Semitism? Right-wing evangelical Christians supporting Israel because they think it will bring about the end times where all of the Jews will die. Worst anti-Semitism in the world. That was a real thing actually typed and put out for the world to see, and it's a perfect example of why we will never see the Democrats in Congress do anything to Omar or other like-minded people. If you have a media willing to pile anti-Semitism charges on the other side for no reason at all, it's the perfect cover for your crap sandwich of a bill. But does Uygur actually have a point? Are there some Christians who hold this view? Sure, but it's a minority who do, and according to Vox, no right-wing love fest of a site, the numbers could be as big as 1/3. I dare say much less than the majority of the 68 million Shiite Muslims in Iran who believe in the 12th Imam, who will usher in the end times, but only after Israel is defeated so Muslims can take over the world and trigger his reappearance on Earth. But that's not anti-Semitic, right, Cenk? Oh, that's right. He's doing this to carry water for a Muslim member of Congress, so he can't say that. Anyway, back to Cenk and his anti-Christian bigotry. Rather than call attention to a minority sect he painted with a very broad brush, I mean, he chose his words very intentionally, attempting to condone Omar's words by playing the whataboutism game. See, Christians believe this stuff too, so it's really not that bad. I was just waiting for his next tweet to be like, but the Southern strategy! But the proof of why Democrats won't ever call out Omar doesn't stop there. Just prior to Cenk's anti-Christian tweet, he first tweeted this out. What's more important, a resolution denouncing words and your interpretation of them, or one denouncing the actual oppressive occupation of millions of Palestinians? When is that coming? Democratic leadership betrays their priorities in their actions. Hashtag I stand with Ilhan. Cenk is a political activist first and foremost, and that is what makes this tweet so telling. It's a shot across the bow at the Democratic leadership, and not a thinly veiled one at that. He's telling the Dems, we don't care about Omar's anti-Semitism. You better do as I say and take on Israel, or lose my support and the support of fellow leftists like me. So, do you now see how we got to the response the Dems decided on for Thursday's resolution, and why 23 Republicans called them on their bullcrap? But, much like I had to say last week on this very channel, I'm glad Cenk and others are speaking these ideas in public. It continues to reveal who these people really are, not what they want you to believe behind some well-crafted PR machine or politically watered-down talking point. They're not interested in calling out anti-Semitism wherever it exists. They only care about making sure that the state of Israel doesn't exist. Once again, a harsh statement, but one based in the reality of their own words and actions. When you add up the pressure from the new wave of representatives An upcoming presidential primary, a base that increasingly is hostile towards anything related to Israel, and a media willing to cover for anti-Semitism? Why would you do anything but the politically expedient thing? Posturing with bullcrap resolutions denouncing hate without any real action against those who made this resolution the thing that actually happened does nothing, and that's just the way the Democrats want it. It's just too bad those in Washington, D.C. can't figure out that standing against anti-Semitism strongly would be a good thing for this country. It may just lead to this balkanized country becoming less so. That goes for both sides of the political landscape. All right, you fine folks, that does it for this week. As always, hit that subscribe button below and that notification bell thingy so you don't actually miss an episode of the show. Got thoughts on today's topics? Keep it smart, keep it to the facts, and hit that comment button. I promise I won't bite. If commenting here isn't your thing, let's try talking on Twitter at The Coppin Show. Until next week, let's keep on growing this community.